Hello, everyone. This is the second in a magnificent series of lectures on the history of music in Ghana, West Africa, Africa, and the whole wide world. And it's being delivered by our good friend Kobby Ankomah-Graham, who is a Ghanaian scholar. He's a cultural theorist, and he's also a PhD student at the University of Ghana. He's already given us a first rendition of it. Was so wonderful. And I don't want to, I'm reintroducing him for the benefit of those who missed the Tuesday's lecture. He has an LLB and an MA in International Studies and Diplomacy from the University of London, or the School of Oriental and African Studies. And he's a man of many trades, a master of all of them. Join me in welcoming Kobby.
Thank you very much. Okay, so we're going to dive straight into things. If you remember, for those of you who were here the last time around, I put in there that there were different stages of Africa's independence. And so at this point in time, we've reached like the 80s and the 90s. And the way I've structured these presentations are such that the last one was very focused on the past, high life music in particular. Today, we're going to go more into the meat of Afrobeats before we go into the future in Tuesday's session. So you have this wave of freedom across the continent, particularly around the 60s, but by the 80s and 90s, it's the minority white-ruled regimes. And so we're finding freedom. But countries that have already had independence, like Ghana, are experiencing, I don't know whether you call this freedom or not. And as a result of this, a lot of people started to leave. So you had mass exodus, a lot of artists. This is the high life artist, George Daku. And people fled to the US, the UK, Germany, etc., etc. And it's because, as I said in the last class, the military, when they came in, there were 4 coups d'etats. And during that time, there were curfews. There was taxation on musical instruments, vinyl, etc., etc. And so it was a bad time. It just killed Accra's very vibrant nightlife. And so a lot of musicians left. And so some of them found themselves out in the diaspora. And they made really interesting music. I'll start off with this group. So this song, I'll get to it. Okay. This is Osibisa, the most successful Ghanaian act of all time. Forget Sarkodie, forget Amare, etc., etc., and I'll explain. Essentially, they blended a lot of different types of music together, and basically, they are credited with introducing Western audiences to African music, period. Okay? It's rumored that the term world music was used to describe their music because they just didn't have a definition for it. And importantly, they released the song that you're hearing. This song reached number 55 on the Billboard 200 chart. I think it was in 1967 or so, okay? So they were based in London. Now around this time, you essentially have also reggae. Because remember the formula that I came up with, which I was talking about with high life, is essentially you always have Ghanaian elements, but aside from Ghanaian elements, they mix with whatever music is the most popular in the Black diaspora. So if it is funk music and you combine it with high life elements, a little bit of jazz, you're getting Afrobeat, as in Fela Afrobeat. If it is jazz, that is really big. Then you're getting big band high life, palm wine high life mixes with calypso. We also started mixing reggae because there was a point in time where reggae was super, super big. And so there are two legends in particular in Ghana who are seen as like really, really big. I mean, there are a few others. But they do a form of music called, it's also high life, but it's called Bogger high life. And if you think about reggae music, if you think about a song like Natural Mystic by Bob Marley, you guys are going to make me sing. There's a natural mystic flowing through the air. And the instrumentation is dun, 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 dun. So listen to this, for example. This is bum, 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 bum. So this is Kojo Enchi and this is Amachi Dede, and these are legends of Ghanaian music who they still draw massive crowds today. So Bogger High Life was kind of like this kind of sound, but this was one part of the Bogger High Life sound, because in the 1980s, the biggest black artist in the world was who? In the 1980s, Michael Jackson. Yeah, Michael Jackson. And the type of sound that he was making in the 80s was very electronic, you know? And so Ghana, I keep saying, we're very trendy. And so we kept up with that. And so you get the likes of Charles Amois, appreciates the Jerry curl, put some respect on his name. But this is Eyodasem. It is about love. That's what Eyodasem means. Listen to the instrumentation. So we've moved very far away from just pa, 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 pa. The thing that is Ghanaian here is the fact that he is Ghanaian and he's speaking his language. In this case, I don't know if he's speaking Chi or Fanti. It is Chi, yeah, okay. So you can hear the different influences. So this too is Bogger High Life because people went to different places. Some went to Germany. Those who went to Germany, some of them went to Dusseldorf, some of them went to Hamburg. And so Bogger High Life, that's literally where the name comes from.
There are many bergs in, so Brandenburg, Nuremberg. So the Berg was separated from Germany and became Berg, the Bogger High Life.
And these are people who they travel, and then, I mean, when people come home, they flex. You bring your foreign currency, you're there for a short amount of time, and that flexing, people are looking at you and they're like, oh, life must be very nice outside. Okay. So what about the children of the Boggers? Okay. What about the children of the Boggers? And that's where this lady, friend of mine, comes in. This is the Nigerian Ghanaian writer, Taye Selassie. She wrote an essay called Bye Bye Baba, in which she talked about Afropolitans, Africans of the world. I have an anecdote here, actually. So Bye Bye Baba, in the opening scene, she describes herself being in a bar in the middle of West London. And she's listening to DJ Zek, who's playing all of these African songs. She literally describes it here. They belong to no single geography, but feel at home in many. They are Afropolitans, the newest generation of African immigrants, coming soon or collected already at a law firm, Chem Lab, Jazz Lounge near you. This is familiar to me because DJ Zek is Ezeko Akimian, who is the person who taught me how to DJ. And the beef that I have with Taye is that the collective that I DJ'd with Amplify, there were 5 of us. 4 of us were African, but I was the one who played the African music. So if she's saying that somebody was playing African music, it wasn't Zek, it was me. And she's describing essentially, we were a gathering of young black people in the UK who were interested in more black music than what we were hearing on radio. So we played a lot of neo-soul, we played a lot of Afrobeat, because Afrobeats wasn't a thing yet. We played jazz, we played soul, we played funk. And so this was the thing. You raised your hand.
Because I think I learned about Afropolitanism in Professor Seck's class.
Okay.
And I guess I'm curious, like, what's this like tension or this relationship of making art or DJing or doing these things that are African or Ghanaian without actually being interested in moving back or being back in the place?
So it's not about not being interested in moving back. Sometimes it's about the circumstance of where you are. Sometimes it's about connection. I've been back in Ghana for 20 years now. Out of the 5 of us, I'm the only one who moved back. But I have friends who used to come along. My friend Lisa, she was the one who would always open the floor. She moved back to Nigeria 20 years ago as well. And in my case, it's because an opportunity came up and I just felt like Britain wasn't working for me. I was born there, but then my luck is that my parents made it a point to send me back to Ghana when I was a child. So I was, bless you, so I was, I think 8 or 9 when I first moved to Cape Coast. And the privilege that I have is that I learned my language, Fanti. Now I'm in Ghana and I tell a lot of my friends to come back. Some of them do, and when they come, they don't quite fit in. Bless you again. Yeah, they don't fit in, and part of it is because they don't know the nuances, the language, etc., that I learned as a child. So it's not always a choice. It's the circumstances that you find yourself in. And I guess the reason why I raise this Afropolitan thing is because I myself, I had a different take on it, personally. This is me posing as a child, you know, like, this is, so the thing is, being in the UK, I was the child of Ghanaian immigrants. My parents were both educational migrants, right? So they weren't creative migrants like, let's say, Osibisa, etc. But they were in London, and they had me. They had my brother. And the thing is, there are people who are in London, but they live Ghanaian lives in London. They go to Ghanaian church, Ghanaian barbers, they watch Ben TV, which is a Ghanaian station. They listen to Rainbow Radio. They are living in Ghana, but they just happen to be in the UK. And so their Ghanaianness is not questioned. But for someone like me, even today, my Ghanaianness is regularly questioned. In Ghana and out of Ghana. I've been at the border in Togo, for example, and the Togolese are like, but you're not Ghanaian, you don't speak Chi. And I have to explain that Chi is one of about 145 languages in Ghana, you know? So for me, when the Afropolitan thing came up, it was like, okay, a name for our lost tribe, you know, like we who our Ghanaianness is questioned, there's something for us. But that's not what Afropolitanism turned out to be. This is what it turned out to be. The signature of African sophistication. And from my perspective, it was like it was hijacked by an elite whose Ghanaianness is not necessarily questioned, you see. Or the Afropolitan collection. If you go to Ghana, there's a hotel called the African Regent. And I think they call themselves the Afropolitan Hotel. What does that mean? You see? So there are people who question it. Another friend, the late Kenyan writer Binyavanga Wanana, he said Afropolitanism became a mark of crude cultural commodification. My junior in school at SOAS, like I feel like all the Afropolitan people who critique and don't critique, we all know each other. To be honest, when I look at the launch of OK Magazine Nigeria, or I hear about palm wine mojitos and fashion shows, it leaves me feeling somewhat depressed. Our value is not determined by our ability to produce African-flavored versions of Western convention and form. That's a very deep statement, and I think it's an important one when you think about things like Afrobeats, high life, etc. Because remember, I'm explaining that high life essentially, at any point in time, high life is a conversation between Ghana and its diaspora. And its diaspora is having a conversation with where they are, the West, or wherever, okay? But let's go back to Ghana and to this man right here. It's so imposing when he's on the big screen like this. This is the late Jerry John Rawlings, who I spoke about in the last class. There was a slide where I showed a soldier just now. That was Rawlings. It's the same guy. He reinvented himself in the early 90s. So he resigns from the military and he runs for president. He wins 2 terms. He's the person who put us on structural adjustment programs. And he did 2 interesting things. He started quoting African Americans back, you know, placing emphasis on Nkrumah and Pan-Africanism. But he also made peace with Nigeria. Those of you who weren't here, there is a rivalry between Ghana and Nigeria, which you have probably heard of, at the very least because of jollof. But it's way deeper than jollof. And I explained in our last class that there was a point in time where Ghana was doing very well, and we kicked out our Nigerian population, which was about 20% of the population. And then a couple of years later, Nigeria was like, okay, now it is our turn. Ghana must go. And all of a sudden, the Ghanaian population within a short amount of time shot up by 1 million people. We're a small country. And that's had effects. Rawlings was the person who, he went over, there was a new president, new military leader, I think it was Babangida, and he kind of made peace. And so Ghana and Nigeria, our rivalry is now a more friendly one. Okay? But another important thing that he did, which is really key, if you're going to talk about Afrobeats, is press freedom. He introduced a lot more press freedom in Ghana than there was under military rule. And this was fertile ground at a time where the most popular form of black music in the world shifted to hip-hop. Okay? Hip-hop popping off from the streets of New York, and essentially, I mean, from an African perspective, one of the first things you think about when you think about hip-hop music is parental advisory stickers. They swear, okay? And so Ghana, when hip-hop popped off, you have to understand, it was very familiar to us. It has an emphasis on drumming. The drums are a key feature, the beat. That's what the DJ's job is, to carry the beat. But the swag of it was something that we were used to. The call and response. So, cho-bwe, hey, cho-bwe, hey. These are traditional call and response. This is something we were used to. Even, I remember there was a movie called Above the Rim, Tupac Shakur. And I think he had a song on there called Pour Out a Little Liquor. That's libation. We do that. That was familiar to us. The dancing, that was familiar to us. But even quite simply, the orators, you know, like we have a mode of speaking. In a place like Ghana, traditionally speaking, sometimes people think that Ghanaians are very convoluted in our speaking. But it's because traditionally, to speak in a straightforward manner is to speak like a child. When you grow up, you speak in a complicated fashion, traditionally speaking. You don't talk directly to the king, you talk through a linguist. And the linguist translates the words of the king. So all of this was very familiar to us, to the extent that we even have a claim of having fathered hip-hop. Okay? It's a claim. It's a claim. It's a very audacious claim by the likes of Panjian, who you'll see on the next slide. But so this man is Jeduble Ambole. I played a song, Simiguadu, in our last session, where he was doing this kind of combination between high life and funk, which I was calling Ghana funk, essentially. And he has this thing that he does in Fanti called simigwa. And it's a rhythmic talking where he's like, I wish I could play it immediately. But anyway, so the long and short of it is that the way music traveled at the time, there was no Spotify, there was no Apple Music. People would actually carry vinyl. So when someone is going to visit Ghana, going to visit Nigeria, they'll come back with vinyl. And so we know that Ghanaians were in New York around the time that hip hop was popping off there. And DAAAS records would have been there around that time. And so you'd have been hearing somebody essentially rapping, but not in English, okay? So again, all of this is very familiar to us. So when hip hop pops off, thank you. So that's DAAAS. Thank you very much. You can add DJ to your repertoire. So in Ghana, hip hop was very popular, very fast. And one of the first groups to do it were a group called Talking Drums. And they were managed by a guy called Panji Anoff. Panji Anoff was like a sound engineer. There's a documentary that I highly recommend you watch. It's called Hip Life Rewind. And it talks about a lot of these things. And I've taken a clip of Panji talking essentially about trying to promote his group, Talking Drums, in the United States. Let me play it for you now.
I'm about to blow. Cause he's rhyming with the O. Once had an afro, but now some cornrow. Thinky, yes, I'm thinking.
I had wasted a lot of money taking Talking Drums to America and thinking that in 1995, America was ready for a Burna Boy. They were rapping, but they were wearing these batakaris. 30 years ago were considered to be very primitive, traditional clothes. But I went to Atlantic in 1995 with Talking Drums. I shouldn't have done. Because I met record executives who couldn't even conceive that there was hip-hop in Africa. So it took till 2020 for an American label like Atlantic to sign Burna Boy.
Okay. So early hip-hop in Ghana, you could hear them, they was mostly speaking English. It was the chorus that was saying, Adin, Adin, why, okay? But the rapping was in English, okay? The person who really comes along and just really amplifies and does something different is this guy. This is Reggie Rockstone. You can hear the sample. This is Fela. Call and response. So essentially what you're getting here is someone who is applying rap, and rap comes with an American accent, generally speaking, right? And he's basically like, yeah, forget that. His father was a legend of African fashion. He himself, he was a breakdancer at a point in time. And I've interviewed him before, and what he says is that these raps that he used to write, sometimes in order to get the lyrics right, he would literally have to go to the University of Ghana library to check against the language. So when he's in Accra, that's what he would do. When he's in Kumasi, he would speak to like his elders and stuff. The thing that blows his mind today is that people can freestyle in Chi. That was impossible in his time. He had to take his time to write his rhymes, cross-check. It's an evolution. When he sees someone like Sarkodie, his mind is just blown. So he really made rapping in an African language really, really cool. And Nigeria took note. Hip life actually had an influence on like Nigerian pop at the time. Like I said, his fusion of hip hop with local language became a blueprint for how to Africanize hip hop without losing street credibility. Okay? Nigerian pioneers like Rugged Man, Idris Abdul Karim, Two-Face, etc., drew inspiration from this, rapping not just in English but Pidgin, Yoruba, Igbo, etc. Early 2000s saw Ghanaians and Nigerians, from the performances to the DJs, etc., moving side by side. So you had groups in Ghana who were big in Nigeria. So Samini was big in Nigeria, VIP in particular, and we'll get to that. And then Ghanaian artists, some early ones, Yogi Dogi and Sonia Chiba, for example, were open to fusing hip life, which is what the music became. It's hip hop and high life. Hip life is what we called it. But they would mix it with dancehall. They would speak with raga, with the patois, right? And it opened the door for later acts like Timaya and Burna Boy, who also started doing this later down the line. But Ghana's earliest labels provided a model for the low-budget DIY music production and grassroots strategies that Nigeria then adapted on a larger scale, because Nigeria is, by definition, larger scale. I said in the last class that like my Nigerian friends are always like, oh, Ghana, you guys, you're always punching above your weight. It's so cute. Whereas for us, I think our main concern is erasure. Nigerian main character energy is very strong. So take a look at this, for example. This is VIP, the original lineup of VIP, not VVIP, which is what happened later when Reggie Rockstone actually joined VIP years down the line. So this is their song Ahum Kawum from 2003. I think there's a slight delay on this one. So this is a Ghanaian classic, a hip life classic. Ahum Kawum. So your face looks... Ahum Kawum would literally mean it's like there's health in your face. You look good, okay? Years later, 2017, Wizkid does Manya, and it's almost like a tribute song to it. The instrumentation is completely different, but he's like, I do hope that he paid VIP royalties. Now, an interesting thing that was happening in Ghana at the time, and is always happening in Ghana at the time, is also things to do with kind of like language and class and stuff like that. So one thing you need to understand is at this point in time, two of the biggest icons in Ghana are Reggie Rockstone. This is him now, much older, with the white in his beard, and Rawlings. These are two men who, when they're speaking on a day-to-day basis and in interviews, you hear accents that do not sound like they're from Ghana. Rawlings, I think his father was Scottish. Reggie was raised between the Bronx and London and different places, and so he to this day, he speaks with a very heavy American twang. But he's a Kumasi guy. So when he speaks his Twi is as Twi as it can get. But when he speaks English, it's an American style of English, right? And a lot of people looked at this, and it's almost like that's what they wanted to emulate. So they were looking at hip life. Hip life does have high life in it. That song that I played, you can hear high life guitar in the background. But there were the people in Ghana who, they were not interested in making hip life. They were interested in making hip hop. They wanted to stand toe to toe with Nas and Jay-Z and those people. And so they kind of branched off, and they decided, we are GH rap. We are not hip life, okay? And to a limited amount of success. There were really, really great rappers in there, but eventually what they found is something had to give. So if you're not going to speak in a local language, at the very least, you might want to think about adding some pidgin. And so that started happening a little later down the line. I put these signboards here. These signboards are not from Ghana. I think they're from somewhere in Southeast Asia, actually. Because wherever you go, they'll tell you Pidgin is bad, it spoils your language. And the Nigerians didn't want to hear it. They started Wazobia FM a long time ago. Full radio station in Pidgin. How many years did it take for the Queen's English to catch up with that? I actually wrote about it in a very celebratory fashion in The Guardian. But the thing that I've found going to Ghana is when I'm in Ghana and I go and I negotiate a taxi fare, because in Ghana it's not always Uber. You speak to the taxi driver and you negotiate, you see. If you negotiate in your very fine English, they will charge you for your very fine English. If you're able to speak Pidgin, at least the price will come down a little bit. If you're able to speak a local language, you can bring it down further. That's just the way it is. But there's an importance to Pidgin, whether you like Pidgin or not. And it comes across in the music. Now, when it comes to English, every year, new words are being added to the dictionary. So literally. So around the time that George Clinton, James Brown and co. were describing their music, they decided to call it funk. Do you know why they called it funk? Does anybody know the reason why they called it funk? When you hear the song, and the song is really nice, it's like you squeeze your face like something is smelling. It's funky, okay? And so the music was called funk music, and it's entered the dictionary. And now when you talk about funk, most people, when they think about funk, they're not thinking about smell, they're thinking about music or style, okay? This is the esteemed American professor, Wheezy F. Baby. What word did he contribute that is officially in the English language? Bling. Bling is in the English dictionary now. These three also contributed a word that is now officially English. The clue is this is from the video of that song. Bootylicious is officially in the English dictionary.
The whole licious, not
The whole thing. If you can find enough in Scrabble, you can play Bootylicious and you can just win the game. That's a long word. What word in the English dictionary is being reflected here by the reformed VIP? This is VVIP with Reggie Rockstone. Selfie. Okay? So these are all words that are now officially in the English dictionary, right? English is the official language of Ghana, right? It's our official language. The question to ask yourself is, how many words has Ghana contributed to the English language? Because language is alive, it's dynamic. Especially when you're talking about like rappers. Rappers are coming up with new phrases all the time. I just showed you evidence. How many words has Ghana contributed to the English dictionary, if language is alive? I'm told that Hamatan was from us. As far as I know, the other words are diseases. Koshoko. So one of the reasons I love Pidgin is because Pidgin isn't like that. Pidgin is where we are putting our new words all the time. So my father was very prolific in his fathering. And so, God rest his soul, I am 47. My youngest sibling is 10. There's range. I went to secondary school at a very different time than my younger siblings. Around the time I was going to secondary school, we had a word called deft. That thing, be deft. That means that thing is rubbish. When I got back from London, my younger siblings had grown, they were teenagers, they were in school. And they would always use this word, yawa. And it took me a while to understand that yawa is what I would call deft. And it's because the language is constantly growing and changing. And if you ask yourself, where does yawa come from? Yawa, it actually exists. I think, and I could be wrong, but I think it comes out of Hausa, right? Why would Ghanaians be all of a sudden using a word? Deft sounds a lot more English what's the difference between my time and my siblings' time? The difference is Nigerian hegemony, cultural hegemony. Nigeria has taken over the film, music, etc., etc. And so it is possible that this was absorbed from Ghana. It is also possible that, but you slice open the language and it tells you something about us in a way that English does not, because we're not able to contribute as much to English. The pointer question I was going to ask you was, do you know how many words we have contributed to English as Ghanaians? So some people who were thinking about this in Ghana were these guys, the FOKN boys. The FOKN boys, One Love and Mensa, they decided that they were going to do a song that was just very Ghanaian. They were tired of listening to like American songs where there are references to American things and only Americans can understand it. They were like, we're going to make the most Ghanaian song in whatever English we can speak possible. So I'm going to play a remix that uses Snoop Dogg's I Wanna Rock Right Now. But this is essentially the song that they came up with. And I've put the lyrics there so that you can see how many references you understand if you're not Ghanaian.
I be the smell, the melanin in my aroma. The Charlie water wearing Roma. The water in the leaf eater.
So when I see your mother greeter,
the coconut and mango tree climber.
The socks ball in the gutter go and find her.
The cycle schooler. The sharp brain but #1 class distraction fuller. The minerals in the cooler stealer. They do it with my bare hands, orange pillar. Mozama this or Christo church healer. The botos watcher. The better go and hide your daughter. The better even hide your wife or your younger sister. Alasa eater, the yoyi breaker, Atia Terra, above Katia seed cracker, the trotro taker, the older patroka laugher, the tadpole go fish hunter, the Okobera trap setter.
How many of those references did you get if you're not Ghanaian? They decided that they were going to make the most Ghanaian. They wanted it such that like if Jay-Z comes to Ghana, he should be learning how to be Ghanaian. He should be using our references. We don't need to. So that was the vision, okay? And it ran very counter to GH rap. Very, very counter to GH rap. It was like anti-GH rap. Okay? So we're moving forward in time. Ghana, 2016, 2017. This was an awesome time to be Ghanaian. Maybe the best time. The year before, Black Stars had carried Africa all the way to the quarterfinals. Bagana. 2017, we turned 50. And we discovered oil. And we really thought that that was like, yeah, like, we were really, really happy. So it was a really good time to be Ghanaian. The 2010s, they had their highlights. Musically speaking, we also had kind of this combination of high life and dancehall. So maybe the pioneer of this would have been Batman Samini, who just dropped the Batman and called himself Samini. His big rival, Shatta Wale. Some of you will know him from songs with Beyonce, etc., etc. But Shatta is Shatta. He's a force of nature. And maybe Shatta's biggest rival at the moment, Stonebwoy. Okay. And so dancehall has always been very popular in Ghana. In my time, it was raga, etc., etc. But like dancehall became really popular. And it's popular with women too. We have women artists who also use it. So this song that's going to play is by Kaki. Kaki is managed or was managed by Samini. What I like about this song is dancehall, but you can still hear 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, ka, right? And that continues today. The most viral hit in Ghana at the moment, outside of Ghana, is by a young lady called Molly, who's done a song with Shensia, Skilly Bang, Shake It to the Max. Okay? How many of you have heard this? Let's see how many of you are TikTok active. If you are on TikTok, you have heard this song. And if not, you will be hearing this song throughout the year. This song is hugely popular at the moment. And as a result of songs like this, Shaggy has a theory that essentially Afrobeats, he sees it as a derivative of dancehall music. He can say it in his own words.
Which comes from dancehall. If you listen to reggaeton, which is a billion-dollar industry, all right, or genre, I should say, they're still on that dancehall beat.
Right.
Right? The beat itself, the reggaeton beat is called dembow.
That's
Dembow,
the...
yeah.
That comes from Shabaran. Dembow.
Yep.
You know what I'm saying? Afrobeat is kind of a spin-off. In Africa, I used to go to Africa and play the stadiums every year. It was just like a clockwork. You know, Uganda, Kenya, Tanzania, you know, the Congos, stadiums. Most of African, what was played in Africa at the time as their main music was dancehall. So Afrobeat is kind of from dancehall.
Absolutely.
You know, and inspired by it.
I think it's definitely inspired by it, but I think he stretches it too much. He stretches the influence too much. But when you listen to Afrobeats now, there are two main beats. There's the... But then there's also the... There's a lot of that. So there's a song called Pami, Wizkid with Adekunle Gold, Omale, etc. And it uses that kind of beat as well. Like, it's very kind of almost Zouk influenced. And that's a strand that exists in the music as well. And it's because of dancehall. Yes.
Does that second beat have a name? Because the first one's like the clave that you described. Does the second one have a name, or is it?
So I think, as far as a name goes, he's right. Dembow, which was a song by Shaba. The Dembow beat is the foundation for reggaeton. And that particular strand of like Afrobeats that does have that beat, it's a very similar beat to the reggaeton beat, but it's played with different instruments. Yeah. But in the 2010s, I would argue that the sound that really typified things was, it was a lot more up-tempo. As a DJ, I saw this because DJs, we measure things in beats per minute. Your average song that you listen to, your R&B song, is usually around 95 to 100 beats per minute. Something shifted in the 2010s. I don't know what happened in... Actually, I know exactly what happened in America. There was a producer called David Guetta. David Guetta started doing production for the likes of the Black Eyed Peas, Usher, The DJs Got Me Falling in Love Again, Oh My Gosh was Will I Am. And the beat changed and became very European. So all of a sudden you were hearing a lot of... I think the kids call it uns music. So big example is I've Got a Feeling by the Black Eyed Peas. Okay. In Ghana, we have a word that we use for this called asokwo. And asokwo, we kind of use it to laugh at people in a sense. It's like, because for us, remember, we deal in polyrhythms. What do you mean your beat is... Where is the rhythm? Like, what? It's so basic. We have like just... When I was in secondary school, songs that were like, there was like maybe one that we respected, which was, I think I've Got the Power by Snap. That was an Unsun track. We had time for that. But we want beats. We want like, that girl is poison. That's what we want, you know? So all of a sudden, American R&B, Neo, Usher, Black Eyed Peas, etc. So everyone was doing like this uptempo, and in Europe, they were looking at it like, but we were doing this. Why are you guys going back in time? We're trying to emulate you. But in the UK, black people there were absorbing influences. And so you get essentially, listen to the beat. So this is the genre called UK Funky. This song came out in Ghana as well, and it was like the national anthem. It's called Party Hard. What I love about it is it's a polyrhythm. It has, but it also has ta 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 ta. It's a very basic polyrhythm, but it's literally like the embodiment of simultaneously your European strand and your African strand. It's genius. And it was funky. This came to Ghana and this song will come on and kids will be like, This is the national anthem. This song was huge. You don't understand, it was huge. It was so huge that Doneo actually came to Ghana, came to visit, because he's part Ghanaian, part Nigerian. Came to Ghana and he collaborated with this guy who's a big music executive in Ghana now called Richie Mensah. He manages Kiddy and Kwame Eugene. But he was an artist in his own right, and they did a song together that was very... And he had an artist called Easy. And he did a song for her that was very different from anything that we were listening to at the time. It was called Wengeze. This is what it sounded like. So it's almost like uns, but we won't make it. We complicate it. And notice the speed has changed. Everything is up tempo now. Okay? Cool. Very recently, Amaraid was the first solo artist to perform at, the first solo Ghanaian artist to perform at Coachella. And she had a segment where she stopped the music and she was like, I need you guys to understand I'm from Ghana. She had the flag in the background and she shouted out some people. And the main woman she shouted out was Easy, and she played Wengeze on stage. If you want to know about that, shameless plug number 2, this is me, this is my blog. Please go there. I wrote an article about it. Black Star, Sad Girl, Amare Coachella, and the Politics of Belonging. More importantly though, High Life plus Asokpo gave birth to Azonto. Because like I said, whatever you throw at us as Ghanaians, we are trendy people, we will throw it back to you in our style. So American R&B, oh, you guys want to do up-tempo now? Cool. All of a sudden, Ghanaian high life essentially picks up speed and we start doing up-tempo music at the same speed. So, and I know this as a DJ because the speed at which I would play I've Got a Feeling, DJ's Got Me Falling in Love Again, and any Azonto song, generally speaking, 120 to 125 beats per minute. This was not the case for old music. You have exceptions, but generally speaking, the speed of the music picked up. And the thing that you have to understand here is, again, remember high life, whenever people are like, Burna Boy is like, I don't make Afropop, I make Afrofusion. It's all Afrofusion. We've seen Caribbean influences here. We've seen David Guetta. I mean, I guess he's African, he's North African. He's from, is it Morocco? I think he's Moroccan, you see. But essentially, there are influences from everywhere in the music, right? And Azonto, basically, the beauty of Azonto was, it was one of the first times that you had, it's not just a new form of sound, but it is the dance that comes along with it. There's a dance called Apa on the coastal towns, and me, I don't know how to Azonto. But some of the basic Azonto moves have things like, there's a washing maneuver, okay? Or it comes out of the people of Jamestown in Accra, they're Ga, and they're really known for boxing. Some of the best boxers in the world come from there. And so there's a boxing movement in there as well. Just daily hand movements that mimic popular activities, okay? And what you have to also understand is that these songs, these sounds are a constant conversation, not just in Ghana or in Nigeria, but with our diaspora. And so the thing that you have to understand when it comes to something like Azonto is, this song playing in the background, this is Fuso DG. He's a Ghanaian who's based in the UK. All these sounds are getting to the UK, and they're really popular. DJ Abrant here, Ghanaian based in the UK, is given a show by, I think it's Kiss FM. And he wants to play all these new musics that are coming, that are African, but they are not Yusu Undu, they are not Angelique Kidjo, they're not world music. What does he call the show? He's like, I'm going to call it the Afrobeats show. That is how come we started calling all of this Afrobeats. He is not the inventor of Afrobeats, but he's the one who gave it its name. Okay? And this is 2011. So the sound of the time, you're getting Azonto in particular in there. So in Ghana, one of our biggest, our king of rap, Sarkodie does an Azonto song. It helps the thing to explode. This is You Go Kill Me. And it features two giants. EL, who was one of the kings of GH rap. The guy who sings on this track, that's EL. And then that's Sarkodie. He looks a lot slicker now. But we all start from somewhere, right? Yeah. Okay. So again, really, really up-tempo. And there's a significance to this. Remember I was talking about me DJing in London. Those guys who I DJ'd with, in our last lesson, I talked about how I tried to do a night. We tried to do a night that was dedicated to this form of music, but it was too early because people were not posting these songs to the internet. So we're constantly playing the same songs. By the time the 2012 London Olympics comes along, people in London can get Azonto songs online, not through streaming services, but GhanaMotion.com, other illegal downloads. And so you're getting this immediate cross-pollination. And all of a sudden, we move from the London I grew up in, it was not cool to be African. We all were trying to be identified as Jamaican, from anywhere in the Caribbean. Not me personally, but blackness in the UK was a Caribbean thing. That started to shift 2012. You literally have the Congolese comedian Eddie Kadi. The way they did the London Olympics is it's like you had different stadiums. I think it was the stadium where Michael Phelps won for America, the swimming medal. And what they would have is they would have an MC who would keep the crowd entertained in the interludes. And Eddie Kadi was, I think, responsible for the swimming, whatever. And he gets up and he's like, okay, we have an interlude. I am going to teach you guys gathered from all over the world a dance from a place called Ghana called Azonto. So people would have left there and gone to their houses and they'll know what Azonto is. All of these things were really, really seminal. Children of African migrants, some of whom had never returned home, all of a sudden had a reason to be proud to be African. So it's no coincidence that that same year, in the May of that year, is when Afrobeats had its first top 10 hit. Debanj, Oliver Twist. And think, it's still, right? And it's still a 5-beat, 2, 3, 4, 5. So it's not okay? So you see, the Nigerians are doing it, the Ghanaians are doing it, and it's all very up-tempo. Fuso GG, I mentioned him before. He basically becomes the first African to top the iTunes World Chart, wins at the Mobile Awards. Then this happens, and this goes to your question of erasure. Ghanaians were very concerned when this song came out. This is Wizkid with his new song, Azonto. We were like, wait, what? So he does this song called Azonto. And it's not like he's trying to steal it all. He really isn't. He literally says, I've never seen a girl like this before. Listen. Ghana girl. Okay? So basically, he's shouting out Ghana. But around the time he befriends Justin Bieber, somebody interviews Justin Bieber because he's listening to this song. And he says, oh yeah, my friend Wizkid, he told me that this is like a new dance from Nigeria. Then in 2013, P Square come up with something called Alingo. Samini actually does a response to this, which I couldn't dig up. But he did a response because Alingo was Azonto in everything but name. And Ghanaians were just like, okay, what is going on now? And what was going on is that Nigeria had taken the baton and were like, bye, we are out. And they ran with it. Okay? Michelle Williams does a gospel song based on Nigerian hymn. When Jesus says yes, thank you. Drake and Skepta, British Nigerian, okay, feature on a remix because Drake is in the studio with, well, Skepta's in the studio with Drake. Drake is a big fan of Skepta. Skepta is Nigerian. And he's like, oh, let me put you onto something that I've been listening to, Oju Elegba by Wizkid. And Drake is like, I like that. Can we hop on it? And so they do. And it becomes huge. Wizkid basically features on Drake's One Dance. It puts him in the Guinness Book of Records. But if you notice, at this time, Afrobeats is very fast because it's essentially Azonto. It needs to be, like, when people who are not African think of Afrobeats at the moment, one of the things that it is accused of is being sexy. It's a sexy form of music in a way that, like, dancehall used to be kind of sexy. Afrobeats is sexy. I mean, aside from the fact that a lot of black music is essentially to do with love, sex, and relationships, Afrobeats is no different. I mean, Wizkid, you just saw him singing an ode to a Ghanaian woman's body, okay? But the Afrobeats that we listen to now is not like Azonto because certain people make it a decision to slow it down and make it sexy. Okay? Yeah. This is sexy. You don't have to sweat when you're dancing to this. You don't have to embarrass yourself.
Are you ready? If you give your heart to me, I don't go let you.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Just slower. And this is why I'm saying when Ghanaians and Nigerians stop bickering, we make beautiful music together because this song is by 3 people. Ghana's DJ Jules, who's responsible for the beat, Mr. Easy, who was one of Afrobeats' first international champions, and the Ghanaian singer Ifia. This is sexy. And so a lot of the Afrobeats that started coming out at the time, in your car the other day, you were playing Davido, If I tell you, say I love you, oh, din din. The first time I heard that song, you could not tell me that Jules did not produce that. There was no way. It was a Jules production. But it wasn't. Techno produced that. Okay? Yeah, so it's like the sound between Ghana and Nigeria is constantly flowing. You see? And so we're constantly like rivaling each other, but there's a partnership there. And the catalyst is our diaspora. These songs blow up in our diaspora and come back home to us. So now it's not just that we are in Ghana, we're in Nigeria, and we're watching the trends outside. We're doing our own thing now and influencing each other. And it's really beautiful. And our diaspora play a role in that. Beat FM became the first British radio station dedicated to Afrobeats, 2016. 2017, Drake's album More Life contains many Afrobeats and dancehall influences. 2017, Wizkid signs to RCA Records. That's a big record label, biggest ever deal an African musician had ever received. 2017, he becomes the first African artist to sell out the Royal Albert Hall in the UK. Shaku Shaku, because after Azonto, we start getting dance crazes because this is the age of TikTok, okay? Then you have 2018, Kanye releases his album and he calls it Ye. And a lot of people looking for it come across Burna Boy's song of the same name. And his sales jump by 200%. So yeah, for all our problems with Kanye, he helped Burna Boy blow up slowly. Fine. Okay, whatever. And then this happened.
Oh, yeah.
And Africa and African culture suddenly became globally cool. Okay? And as if that wasn't enough, then Beyonce wades in as well with an Afrobeats album. The album, The Gift, it's Afrobeats. I feel so sad for my East African friends who just did not get a look in at all. Amapiano was on that. Moonchild Sanelli was on that project. But Victoria Kimani was so upset. Victoria Kimani was just like, wow, our queen did not look at us. I must admit, I was very surprised that East Africa, you had this guy group. Sauti Soul should have been on that project. That was an omission. Bad Beyonce. Anyway, so British official charts company creates an official UK Afrobeats chart. That starts only in 2020. America, at this point in time, has dropped the ball. There's no Afrobeats chart here. 2021, Wizkid and Tems become the first Nigerian pop artists to earn a spot on the Billboard Hot 100 with Essence. CK, Love Nwatiti, blows up, second Nigerian pop artist on the Hot 100. 2021, Burna Boy wins Best Global Music Album. Billboard finally decides, okay, Afrobeats is worthy of a chart. So America catches up in 2022. And then the Grammys finally introduced the Best African Music Performance category. It includes Afrobeats, Amapiano, Asaka, etc., etc. So now anyone can win this thing. It's very competitive. So Afrobeats has gone from being like this catch-all descriptor of young African sounds to now becoming something that Western artists are collaborating with African stars. African stars are topping Western charts. And this has started featuring in non-African songs. Not that it hasn't before, because as I said in our last class, the foundations of rock music come from din ka din ka din ka din din. Okay? So, and then Afrobeats now has its own children, like Afro Swing or Bacoso in Cuba, Afro Trap, etc., etc. So it's a really, really interesting time. There's a lot of cross-pollination going on. And the significance for us on the continent is, to me, the beauty of it is we are seeing more of a closer relationship with our diaspora, whether we recognize it or not. And that's the Caribbean diaspora. We've mentioned Germany. We've mentioned the UK. We've mentioned the US. There are some really interesting things that are happening here. And so you can choose to focus on whose jollof is better, etc., etc. Or you can look at the fact that we did this. Nigeria, for me, is the amplifier. I personally think Ghana is like the Petri dish. We come up with like the ideas, you know, but the Nigerians are able to take those ideas and they're like, thank you for your service. We've got it from here. And it's not a bad thing. It's just we need to like, you know, I don't think it's a bad thing, me personally. Some people do. So that's it for today. In our next class, the final class, we're going to talk about the future. We're going to talk about how the Brits finally stole the diaspora crown from Black America. Because global blackness used to be set by America. The UK has now made a very strong claim. And America, Black America, is losing its cultural dominance. It's very interesting to watch. We're going to talk about the cool kids and the queer kids. We're not going to ask what's love got to do with it, but what has class got to do with all of this? And then also, why alternative music is not the same as underground. People often use these words interchangeably. Some experts, there's a guy I encourage you to follow called Joey Akan, who is not Ghanaian. He's a Nigerian guy who he has a podcast called Afrobeats Intelligence. And he does some of the best analysis on Afrobeats that I've seen. Not in our academic spaces though. And he makes this mistake a lot. He's constantly calling alternative underground, underground alternative, and one day I'll correct him on it. Yeah. Another reason for a Ghanaian to beef with a Nigerian, but it has to be done. Thank you very much. Any questions? Yes.
Hi, thank you so much again. Learned so much. And my question has to do with the term global blackness and the centering of it in either US or Britain. And this also has to do with language, because of course there's an anglophone story absolutely here. Like if you think about like some of the songs that are considered both diaspora and central song, you can't forget Premier Gao, right? And like there's a sort of like Sukus and Cote d'Ivoire and all that. But then there's also Brazil and Angola and Afro House and all that. So I just wondered what you think about this sort of the dominance of the Anglo world.
So I think this is part of the reason why Afrobeats is actually interesting, because again, the cross-pollination. So what Shaggy is calling the Dembow beat, where it's dum, dum, dum. I don't think we actually got that from dancehall. I think we got it from like the Francophones. It's not Coupe de Calais. That's more the Congolese. But if you think of artists like Tyke and people like that, there's a sound that like Black French musicians have. And I think that's where the influence came in from. So that's one. But the French artists have been heavily influenced by Afrobeats as a sound as well. And so you're finding a lot more, and like whoever your favorite Francophone Black artists are, they now have very Afrobeats sounding songs. Yeah, that sound I'm talking about, that. Think of Aya Nakamura's Hey Jaja. Oh Jaja. I think we got it from there. I think it's a cross-pollination that is happening between Anglophone, like young performers, and Francophone. And it comes because we're also trying to enter those markets. And they're trying to enter ours. And so you find there'll be collaborations, etc., etc. I feel like the Lusophone countries suffer to some extent, but they have their own world. So like you're talking about Afro House and stuff like that, like Kuduro and what it was doing in Angola. Like, so I think a thing that I didn't speak about also is the influence of the launch of MTV Africa. Yeah, MTV Base Africa and Channel O. Because these were music dedicated stations that went across the continent. And so I remember there was an Angolan guy, I think he was from Angola, called Cabo Snoop. He had a song called Windeck, ta, Windeck, da da da, Windeck, Windeck, da da da, and it was, okay? That was big in Ghana when it came out. To date, I do not know one word of what he was saying, but it was funky as, you know, like, and so we vibed with it. And so I think you do get that happening with the TV, but even with the TV, I think now it's fragmented. So you no longer have like MTV Base Africa per se, like they're not as popular. What's happened is the local radio, TV stations have taken cues. And so in Ghana, for example, Foresight TV, etc., etc. And so these are, we will play what we want to play. And it's not always coming from other African countries. So R&B is still quite dominant. I would wager in Ghana, hip hop, I think, has taken a bit of a nosedive. I think for me, the key thing about Afrobeats in particular, and in fact, not Afrobeats, hip life, was that it was the first time I saw, as a DJ, Ghanaians were coming up to me to be like, no. Previously, when I was playing African music, people come up to me and be like, oh, when are you going to start playing 50 Cent? When are you going to start playing Beyonce? Now I'm playing 50 Cent and Beyonce, and they're like, when are you going to play Reggie? When I like, so there was a switch. So I think there's a cross-pollination that is happening. Yeah. I don't know if we have enough time, but yes, okay.
Thank you, Dr. Kobby, for this excellent lecture. Actually, I have two follow-up questions. as a Nigerian, I think I'm not going to revive or reignite the Nigerian and Ghanaian because I think you did justice to Nigerians. But the two follow-up questions I have for you. The first is, I so the first question is about the global diaspora, Black diaspora, particularly in the Asian world, because there's also been like appropriation of Afrobeats coming from Asian artists. I mean, the two example I can think of is Wubai and Vinny the Wang, who were actually Chinese artists, but who started appropriating and incorporating the Afrobeat genre into their music. And I'm thinking about how that can actually shape the way we think about Afrobeat. And that's also important because usually when we talk about diaspora, our understanding of diaspora is often fixated on the Black Atlantic, on the Atlantic. And, we don't really expand our canonical knowledge about the diaspora to places like even the Middle East. Dubai, for example, has been a hotspot. I mean, Polo, for example, who is one of the big show promoter, he does the One Fest Africa festival. I know it's a big festival in Dubai, and Dubai has actually been a popular destination in the Middle East, but also even in the Indian subcontinent as well. So how do you think that the appropriation of Afrobeat in all of this different other regions that we rarely even talk about when we talk about diaspora, how do you think that will shape our global understanding of Afrobeat? That's the first question. And the follow-up question is, so looking at the genealogy of your lecture, I'm kind of like curious what you think about the role that reality shows have played as incubator for breeding new talents in this historical chronology of Afrobeat. And here I'm thinking about, I remember in Nigeria when I was in high school or secondary school then, Star Quest was one that there was Benson and Edges. I think Benson and Edges, because they were the ones. So P Square actually, the blow culture started when P Square's Peter's wife, I've forgotten her name right now. She was the one that introduced P Square to Benson, and Benson, they did a streets kind of like competition that bettered the reality show. And then we have Project Fame we have X Factor, we had Dance with Peter and several other reality shows. And there are a couple of people that came out of that. I can remember that Green coming out, Praise and several other. So what do you think? Because usually in the discussion about Afrobeat, there's always that question about lack of structure. There's no structure, whether it's a business. I think Don Jazzy, to an extent, is the one that's been successful in creating a business model, and building Mavins from no eats to Mavins. But they've always complained about the lack of structure. But the reality show model has created a pipeline, like a multiplier pipeline from invisibility to the sudden blow culture. It has become like an alternative route that produced even more recently people like Chike, for example, also came from that pipeline as well. What do you think about these two questions? Thank you.
So let me take the second one first. I feel like the talent shows, in Ghana, for example, Efia, when she came out as part of a duo called, I think, something and Jane. I've forgotten the name of the duo. Irene and Jane, thank you very much. Yes, Irene Logan and Jane Efia Awindo. So we have that in Ghana as well. And I feel like, talent shows are there. What was more interesting to me about the talent shows is the corporate sponsorship, because I was in the UK before I moved to Ghana proper, and I come from a time where people were wary of corporate sponsorship. Everybody wanted the money, but I come from a time where hip hop would always talk about selling out. Like, Vanilla Ice and MC Hammer had sponsorship deals that they were very vilified for, which are very common today. In a sense, they were visionaries. And so moving to Ghana, what I found interesting was there were talent shows and artists were being sponsored by Nescafe, by Guinness. It was very strange to me, but in context, you understand it because as an artist in Africa, or at least in Ghana, where else are you going to get this kind of money? And the thing that people also need to understand about the music industry generally is it is very rare that somebody blowing up is as coincidental as it seems. Someone like Ghana's biggest export to Nigeria, I would say recently, has been Iron Boy, Black Sherif. Black Sherif, I know in the background, has money from, or at least at a point, had money from, what is the Chinese rival to Huawei? Huawei sponsor Boomplay. Boomplay is like their Spotify on their phones. Boomplay do a lot of monitoring of data to basically see who is blowing up, who isn't. And so very early on, they caught Jackie and they saw that, oh, this one is going to blow. Let's throw money behind her. They also caught Black Sherif around the time that he did First Sermon. And I suspect that some of their money was behind the collaboration with Burna Boy. But it's not spoken about much because it doesn't need to be spoken about much in a sense. And so for me, the story there is less the talent shows than the corporate backing because it's access to money that artists typically do not have, okay? So on the talent show side, I think it's about a linking partly to money that allows you to amplify. And there have been some very interesting formats that have allowed for it to happen cross-continentally. So I remember Coke Studio would do things where they would pair an artist from South Africa with one from West Africa, one from East Africa, one from North, so they play a part. It's part of the pipeline, but it's not the pipeline. And then your first question was to do with...
India, China.
Yes, okay. One of the most interesting things that I've seen is Rema, when he released Charm, he went and performed it in India. When I was in law school, one of my best friends was a Pakistani guy called Suleiman Bilal. Suleiman told me without he was explaining to me that the caste system in his country, and he was telling me that he never grew up to even consider black women as beautiful. The only crush he ever had on a black woman was Tatiana Ali in Fresh Prince of Bel-Air. Period.
She's married to my colleague, by the way.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay. I have beef with your colleague. But anyway, we all had a crush on Tatiana. But basically, so again, absorbing like American culture, liking the culture without necessarily liking the people, right? I remember seeing Rema go and do a performance on Indian TV and seeing people in India screaming for Rema, not for Usher. That one I'd understand. He's an international star in that. This is Rema, I don't know, second, third album. To see Indians screaming for Rema, I thought it was incredible. Of course, it's not new. Osibisa were huge in India, way back in the 60s and 70s. So it's been done before. When it comes to Asia, the thing that I tend to think about is K-pop and the way that K-pop really appropriates black culture in the way that everybody appropriates black culture. I'm interested in the fact that increasingly there's now collaborations, because I think these are some of the things that make inroads. Even if you take like American pop music, one thing that I don't think people credit Pharrell Williams and the Neptunes with enough is America has had its chart, his music chart, and it's been set by race for the longest time. So you have the black blues artists or the rock artists will do a song, and then the record company will come along and they will get a white group to do the song, or they'll get Elvis to do the song, etc., right? And so you've had the Billboard Hot 100, and then you had the Billboard R&B chart. And when I was growing up, these things were very separate. And you'd always get these producers who would do imitation black music. They were usually from like places like Sweden and stuff like that. And they were producing the Backstreet Boys, NSYNC, Britney Spears. Then at some point in time, I don't know which clever executive thought of this, is like, instead of going to the imitation black producers, why don't we go to the black producers? I was in London around the time that Britney Spears released Slave. It was a Neptune's production. As DJs, we were confused. You don't play Britney Spears in a black club. What are you talking about? But it's the Neptunes. What do you do? And then NSYNC had Girlfriend, which was also produced by the Neptunes. So all of a sudden you see this cross-pollination even on the chart. And so it's like now there's a blurring, you see? And I feel like with K-pop, what I'm starting to see now is, sure, there's appropriation, but there's also now collaboration happening, which means that it is possible for you to be a black artist in that space. I don't know what it's like on the ground for black people in South Korea though. But I feel like all of this is part of the inroads that culture makes, but it's not enough. At best, it can be like a seed. Yeah.
Right. So I think I wanted to shift a bit from the music to dance, and I think over the past few years we've seen.
I see.
That's my question.
Okay.
Yeah.
We've seen a lot of like dance groups like emerge, the likes of DWP.
Yes.
I think Afrobeats went to Britain's Got Talent or something and everything. So I want your take on like the influence of like this whole emergence of like dance groups on like Afrobeats in general and like the music industry in Africa or Ghana precisely.
So to tell you the truth, I think that is what Azonto brought to the table that was different. Because when I think of Azonto, I think of hip hop in the sense that when hip hop started, it wasn't just MCs. It was MCs, DJs, and dancers, right? And so in that sense, hip hop wasn't just music, it was an all-in-one kind of culture. And I remember at the time Azonto popped off, there was a guy who even tried to do an Azonto symposium because he wanted to talk about the significance of that. Because for the first time, we felt like we had a thing that we can send out there, which is a culture. It's not just the music, but it's also the dance. But I think part of that success and the fact that so many dancers have followed and amplified is also the TikTok effect. The fact that like you now have people who they can go on TikTok and they can do dances. And so I think that these are things that they've kind of happened around the same time. So there's been this amplifier effect. Street Kids Uganda, like all sorts. But I think
those exploited street kids of Uganda.
So I feel like Afrobeats in that sense has made its contribution towards, let's say, global dance. But again, the question, I guess the bigger question then becomes one of, but who owns and who benefits? Which is the problem that we're having now with like, not just TikTok, but Fortnite. Fortnite will come along and a character is doing Gwara Gwara and the black creators. So I think it's hard for you to do an African dance and claim it as your own. I don't know if that's a good thing. As in, I don't know if, or rather, it's not enough. I think the overall thing that I would simply say is that Afrobeats has produced a lot of dance and brought dance to the world. And I think about it in the sense that if you think about African history, a lot of the dances that we think about now that are traditional from like our people, there was a point in time when those dances were new. And so what I think is happening now is we just live in a time where these things have been moved away from, let's say, religion and culture to now become fashion, right? And so we're a lot more prolific with the dances. Who knows, like 100 years from now, after we screw up the planet and there's some apocalypse, or somebody will see some artifact and they will see Azonto and be like, this must be the traditional dance of the people from the west coast of Africa. And they'll think Azonto was a traditional dance in that respect. And so these are some of the things that I think about, like something in Ghana that we call Adowa. Is it just the dance that happened to be the most popular dance at the time that the colonizers basically came along and essentially cut us off from culture? So it's like this snapshot, right? So those are the things that I ponder when I think about African dance.
Okay, so final question. I'll plant a seed and you can pick it up when I see you again, because I know we're at time. And it is related to dance, but more so, how has dance particularly been used as an incubator, spreader, and preserver of Afrobeat culture? But just to kind of take your last question, and we'll pick it up next class, is you just said Afrobeats produced dance and brought Afrobeat to the world. So my question is, prior to TikTok, how has dance informed Afrobeats prior and you know, because anyway, I don't want to go too far on that, but
so again,
prior to TikTok,
I personally feel like Azonto was a little bit before TikTok. That's how I look at it. And so when I see P Squared, for example, doing Alingo, I don't think it's that they were trying to just steal Azonto. I think it's that they saw that, oh, this thing can be paired with dances. And so it's like they clocked that dance can be a really big amplifier. Because, so Azonto, one thing I didn't talk about, the word Azonto itself is like a reference to, like, I mean, some people say an ugly girl or an uncultured girl or something like that. The first time I ever saw an Azonto video, there was a video that went viral, and it was this girl who, she was doing what at the time seemed like a funny kind of dance. And people were half laughing at her, but also they were like, but the dance is also kind of cool. And then Sarkodie's You Go Kill Me popped off. And then there was a compilation video of kids in secondary schools in Ghana doing these dances to that song. And again, this is pre-TikTok. So this is virality based on like mobile phones and stuff like that. Thank you very much. This water is actually really nice. So I feel like people saw that you can actually push more than just the music before TikTok actually came along. And then TikTok came along and it just, so you get the likes of DWP. Every time you now have like an African concert, there's like the usual suspects of dancers who get called for the AC Samuels and people like that, or the early videos that were happening. But I think another thing I keep on talking about is the diaspora, because I think with a lot of these dances, a lot of them weren't actually coming from the continent, especially with Ghanaian hip life, Azonto. A lot of, yeah, the Azonto video, like the Fuso DG one, the dance came from Ghana, but they took it there. But the one I'll even say is Guilty Beats featuring Papi Kojo, etc. They had a song, Akwaba. And you had these girls doing these dance moves in the video. One of those girls was also in one of Mr. Easy's videos. These are all people in the diaspora coming up with like dance moves fast. And all of this was before TikTok was amplifying. So I think people really saw that. And again, it's a really African thing, because when we think of our traditional music forms, they've always moved with a dance. Yeah, so I think this is what we do. and we're still doing it. Yeah.